Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports and the briefing. Last episode, I didn't use the word briefing. Well, maybe I did, but because out of habit. But the long form podcast or streaming show is Tom Donahue Reports. And everything's under the umbrella of Tom Donahue Reports. But the briefing, as in brief, meaning shorter subject, more to the point, more specific, more case in point, rather than longer form, more detailed, maybe multiple subjects. So that's the differentiation, if you will. That's the distinction. I wanted to make that a little more clear. But regardless, whether it's the briefing, Tom Donahue Reports, in the past Tom Donahue Show, or even further back, Freethinker Radio, or Tom Donahue's America's Town Forum, it's interesting, when I think of all these shows and these variations, the person, the host, the content is eerily similar. Well, guess what? It's because I started the program with these same concepts, these same principles, and I've stayed true to form. Now, as human beings, we do evolve, at least I hope so, in terms of, there's new technology, maybe we've refined our viewpoints, but I don't have wholesale changes, radically flipping. And I see this with so many, and I point this out in various programs and podcasts over the last several years, how someone voted for Obama, and now they're voting for Trump, how they were Reagan Republicans, and now they've all of a sudden become America Firsters and populists. You have people that were radical left or just part of the liberal left, and then now they're all of a sudden on Team Trump. None of this makes sense to me. Now, we do sometimes in life have a spiritual conversion. There can be a radical shift, but it's more isolated and less likely. Now, I do want to go back to the last two podcasts because the theme, although I went into more detail and there was some differences in terms of the entirety of the content, but the topic really pertained to morality no longer matters. Well, it does matter to me, but it just seems like in politics, and it does seem like in the media, that anything goes, and no one's held accountable. And you don't have to have qualifications. You don't have to have a redemption story or try to admit and then make amends. I focused on the ecosystem as the Trump feeder into these governmental positions of power and influence. And when you look at the Fox News orbit, this universe comprises of many defective and flawed and fake individuals. That is why, and plus the larger point is that they're more connected to the Trump administration, and that I didn't bring up as many liberal case in point examples. And a couple that I wanted to just mention just offhand was, remember Charlie Rose, CBS, PBS, and remember Matt Lauer, NBC, and there are others that have also been morally bankrupt and compromised as it relates to sexual abuse, sexual harassment, infidelity, etc. So it swings both ways. But there was a time on the right that, at least in terms of rhetoric, at least in terms of, to some degree, the record, that they tended to be, or at least position themselves to be, more moral and more family values, and that religion and spirituality played a larger role. But now it doesn't really matter. Nothing matters. Nothing makes sense. So it's troubling to me. And you might say, well, you're not talking about the news of the day. Oh, well, there's only 1,000 other shows in the mainstream media and talk radio and podcast and short form, long form, YouTube, social media. You can find it. The issues that I feel have a larger than life theme, or that to me I feel are more incumbent upon the importance and the integrity of our society and our information, is why I'm focusing on these kinds of things. Upon the last episode, where I talked about scandals and lies and deceit and hypocrisy and disinformation and cover-ups as it related more prominently to Fox News, the Trump ecosystem, to government power, positions revealed. But there's going to be many, many subjects that I'm going to want to cover in time. Now, what I was going to talk about, and I think I'll leave this to, and again, I don't purposely try to do a teaser, but the teaser is Trump becoming more like a king, unlike what George Washington saw as the president of the United States, and that it is the imperial presidency, and it's not just a matter of the Great Reckoning and retribution tour. The thoughts of taking greater power and usurping that power, and that you're outside the bounds of the Constitution. The Constitution are not the constraints. There are no guardrails. So we have a president now that, yes, there's bold initiatives and there's some good things. But every president, no matter what the philosophy, ideology, or mission plan is, has to stay within the bounds and the framework of the Constitution. And there's checks and balances. And you can't justify it by saying, well, I know this is what the American people needs. I know this is what the American people wants. Excuse me, you can't speak for every American. And also, you're not a more profound and wise man, certainly not as in comparison and in contrast to the founding fathers. These are great thinkers and doers. And so that, no, you don't even come close to the Thomas Jeffersons and the George Washingtons or the James Madisons and others, okay? You're not even in their league. They're the big leagues, okay? So yeah, we're going to talk more about the imperial presidency and the overreach of power and authority. If you're America first, you don't want to tinker with the sovereignty of other nations. You don't want to have an interventionist foreign policy, and you don't want to misuse and abuse your power or our power as a country, as a superpower. Now, if Greenland or if there are or Gaza or other places in the planet want to work with us, or they want to become part of us, and it's something that we as a people can discuss, then that's great. These nations should not be held at ransom, and they shouldn't be in any way overpowered or bullied, and that we certainly shouldn't pressure our neighbors. Let's just think about the 51st state of Canada. Well, Canada's not all the same, just like the United States varies. And although they tend to be more liberal, just imagine if we did somehow incorporate Canada. Well, guess what that voting block's going to be? It's not going to be pretty much Republican. It's not going to be MAGA. So do you want to defeat the purpose of that? You've just won the popular vote. You won the Electoral College. Do you want the Republican Party, the MAGA Party, to go down in defeat in future years and decades? That's what would happen. So these are just some of the thoughts that I've comprised relating to the last two podcasts. And so I want to expound on some of those. And yes, I will sometimes focus on the hot topics of the day, part of the bigger picture. So I hope that makes more sense, and I hope that you will be sharing my podcast. And of course, you can go to tomdonahuereports.com, carried by most podcast platforms. So if you don't want to use my primary where I post the original program, Podomatic, you can go to TuneIn, you can go to Google and YouTube and iTunes, and there's a whole bunch of other options that you can receive this podcast from and through. We even listed it TalkStream Live, which of course, and TalkRight, that I'm certainly work closely with. So that's it for now. Tom Donahue, Tom Donahue Reports, The Briefing. Have a great day.